Back in Merrimack, check it out. That's right, my hip hop nation up in this joint. MTV. That's right. I used to hear MTV with Merrimack, like Merrimack TV, but MTV, mature TV, the whole deal. You guys aren't getting it at all, I can tell. It's okay. Keep eating your pizza, eat your pasta, your chicken, steak, whatever you're eating for dinner tonight, because this is an awesome show, and we have an awesome guest. James Spillane, Representative James Spillane. How you doing, brother?
Doing good, doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I titled the show, Let's Do Some Splaining, or I think something like that. I don't know, I forget. I forget the titles of half my shows. But in any case, I thought it would be funny because, we run with this joke of, you got some splaining to do.
Yeah, I get it a lot.
I bet you do. It's awesome. I love it. Okay, and he's got that look like, shut up or you're going to get decked on your own TV show. So before I get knocked out, I want to talk to you a little bit about a piece of legislation that came through this past week. And I've already done a little bit of splaining on the bill, and it was a couple weeks ago, I think, and on conversion therapy, sexual orientation, the whole bit. Yeah, it was a bad, horrible, disgusting, and twisted bill for many, many different reasons. But you know my take. I explained why I am against the bill, why I was against the bill. By the way, it passed the House. Sadly, we got a bunch of rhinos and God knows what these people are. I don't know. A lot of them are my friends. A lot of these reps who did vote in favor of this are my friends, and they turned on us. They told me they were going to vote against it, and they went opposite. So I have no clue what happened. But in any case, there's only 99 of us who are actually right and oppose this bill. Representative Spillane was one of them. But I'd like him to offer his reasoning as to why he went against it.
I was opposed to the bill, but not from, a lot of people were opposed to it from a religious standpoint or whatnot. I was looking at it more from a point of government overreach and government getting involved in medical arenas. And I think that it's wrong for us to be passing laws that restrict any kind of therapy that might be taking place, because that's something to be taken between the therapist or doctor and the patient, not something where the government should get involved. I mean, personally, I had quite a long discussion with somebody in the anteroom behind the State House where they were trying to convince me that it wasn't a bad bill, that I could vote for it. And I just stood my ground on it because I seriously don't think that the government should be involved in putting forth any kind of restrictions or passing laws that tell a doctor or a therapist, you cannot discuss this, you cannot go here, and you cannot do this. Some examples that I can think of that I brought up, there's a great number of people that feel that hypnosis is a bogus type of therapy, that it really doesn't work. Mm-hmm. But we haven't banned it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who feel that chiropractors, for everything they say they can heal with in a chiropractor's office, there's a lot of people who say they don't trust them. There's a lot of people who say, yeah, you can't fix my allergies by going to a chiropractor. Stick with backs and necks. We haven't banned it. As far as I know, we haven't even banned the use of shock therapy, which was proven after the 1950s that it really didn't work. It's a matter of educating people and educating a population. It's not a matter of the government stepping in and saying, we're not going to allow this to take place.
Right.
That's a personal decision between the doctor, the therapist, and the person who's being treated. Mm-hmm. Government has no place in that.
That's a good point. It's funny because I actually brought that up in my speech when I went down the well to speak on it. I actually mentioned at the very end of my speech, I made that point abundantly clear because they, when it comes to a pro-life bill, the abortionists always use the same old reused argument of, we should not get between a doctor and the patient. That's between them and only them, right? And so I said the same thing. I said, well, here you go. Here's a prime example of the government getting in the way of the doctor and the patient. But you're wanting to prohibit it because you have an agenda to push a certain narrative and to, frankly, go after a certain group of people, that being Christians. Because Christians are generally going to be the ones that are going to want to help convert, right?
Well, like I said, I wasn't getting into the religious aspect of it.
Right, well, I know that.
I don't care what the reason somebody decides to go and seek help for is.
Right.
I just don't think the government has any place in it. And I would be willing to bet that we have never banned any other type of therapy. We allow sex therapy. We allow all kinds of therapies that may or may not work, but it's a person's decision to decide whether or not that works or not, and whether they want to pursue that therapy.
And you know what? You're proving my point. Now, you oppose the bill for the right reasons, and I completely agree with your reasonings and many others. In fact, the reasonings, again, that I used in my argument. And in fact, I even said it, clergy's not my only concern in the actual speech. If you go back and look at the speech, you'll put it online in another few weeks. Clergy is not my only concern. Parental rights, government overreach, getting between a doctor and their patient. You go down the line. We are infiltrating the government, getting involved in everything where it shouldn't be. And frankly, pulling it out where it should be involved. And that's a big, big problem. And so what I've actually looked at when I was trying to, I wish I could have discussed it more. We limited debate. Yeah, can you believe that? The Speaker of the House actually got us to limit the debate, and we couldn't talk for more than 15 minutes.
Not only was it limited, but it was further limited when a Democrat got up and made a motion that the 15 minutes he was limiting it to per side would be running minutes, which meant that the clock kept running when people were changing at the well. So each person really had very little time to speak on it, and it was something that deserved a lot more vetting than it got.
Agreed.
Because I personally feel like government intrusion in that space is restricting my liberties. Yeah. Now, I think there's a reason why the NHLA didn't take a stand on it and say vote for it or vote against it.
You noticed that too, huh?
Yeah. The NHLA didn't take a stand on it, and the House Republican Alliance didn't take a stand on it. And the reason they didn't take a stand on it was not because it wasn't controversial. It's because you could make an argument that this is restricting liberties one way or another.
Yep.
I think the bigger danger, though, is putting in place a precedent that says the government can go in and limit the kinds of therapies or treatments that any doctor can give.
Well, let me ask you this. Before we go on a little bit further, because actually there's a couple more points I want to bring up about it. If this bill, God forbid, honestly, because this is a dangerous bill, I believe, if this bill passes the Senate and the governor would more than likely sign it into law, do you believe that this will set precedents for pro-life bills to get passed? With the argument that we're getting the government is now getting in between a doctor and the patient.
It could.
Or do you think that it's just more of an agenda piece than anything?
I think that at this point it's just an agenda piece. However, I think that you could also make the case that this is going to open a can of worms, and there's going to be a whole lot of bills coming down where people are now trying to fight on the pro-life side, and then there's going to be people that have other agendas trying to push restricting other types of therapy. It's really setting a precedent, I think, if it passes, that government has the ability to regulate what types of medical or therapy practices can take place, and what types of things can be discussed between a patient and a doctor. Because really, when it comes down to it, conversion therapy is a lot of discussion. Mm-hmm. It's not like a medical procedure.
No, it's not.
And so you're basically telling a patient and telling a doctor, you may not discuss these things when you're in therapy sessions. You can't talk about this.
Right. That's exactly right.
Where's our First Amendment come in for freedom of speech? Where does our ability to have private counsel with our doctors and talk about anything we want to talk about and seek any kind of help that we really want?
Yeah.
Where does that come into play? If the government can come in now and severely limit what a doctor can say to a patient and what a patient can ask of a doctor, that's just wrong. And it's starting down a slippery slope that's going to cause a lot of problems.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right, and that's what I was thinking too. You had mentioned, you touched up on a point that's really good, talking about what this therapy is, in fact. And I actually had a discussion with the National Task Force for Therapy Equality, and one of the attorneys I spoke with actually told me, he said, "Look, we've defeated 15 of these bills across the nation." He said, and they regurgitate the same arguments. First and foremost, he said, they try to make it sound like there's electroshock therapy and things like that, which you had brought up. That haven't been used since the 1950s. He goes, there's nowhere near anything being done like that.
And it's still not banned.
Right, there you go. And so he said, if anything, that would be a rogue practitioner who's illegally practicing the job anyway. He said, but us practitioners, the normal people, he goes, do you know what it really is? What the therapy session consists of? They bring you in, and I did this in my PI speech as well. They bring you in, and they talk with the parental guidance and the minor, and they essentially they walk you through the process. What are you struggling with? What's going on in your head? They basically help you cope with the decision you're making, and they don't persuade you either way. That's all it is. And there's this notion out there that people are being beaten and kicked in the gut and curb stomped on the corner out in some alleyway to beat the gayness out of them, and it's like, well, I have no doubt that somewhere, sometime, at some point, that's probably happening. And guess what? It's not the only people being beat aren't just homosexuals. There's Christians being beat. There's Muslims being beat. Everybody gets beat to beat the whatever it is out of them. You know what I mean? And guess what we have for that? Assault. You can't beat somebody just because you don't like what they believe or whatever. So now we're opening up doors that I think are wrong. I mean, we're like you said, we're setting precedents that is bad, and that's going to open up Pandora's box for a lot of bad to come. And we're going to have to look at these legislators that voted for this and say, you helped this.
It's a tough situation. I didn't believe that it was going to pass so overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
I really didn't, because going into it, it seemed like there was a lot of opposition to it. Mainly because people felt that we shouldn't be intruding on a doctor-patient relationship with government. And it makes sense. It's not the place for government to be. Government's overreached so far these days that they've got their fingers into everything, and people's private lives are no longer private.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I actually had somebody that's near me, I had asked to assist in tabling the bill, because as you know, we were like 8 votes, I think, from successfully tabling it, which is a nice way of killing a bill, by the way. And, it's death with dignity, if you will. And they said, sure, I'll help table it. Well, the tabling motion failed, and they looked at me and they said, now you owe me one. I was like, I owe you one? I don't owe you nothing. I said, no, you owe the whole state one if you don't vote for this, if you don't vote against this in the first place. And the reason why I say that is because they did help table, but then they voted for it when the motion came up and it failed. So basically that happened to a bunch of people. You would have figured that you might have lost a few votes, but I figured it would have passed. I mean, it would have failed with like 130 or 40 opposed. That didn't happen. 99. Man, that's not okay.
It was shocking. It really was.
So,
but we've seen a lot of bad bills go forward and good bills get shot down this year.
We have.
And last year.
We have. We had several gun bills go through just in the last month. What are some of the gun bills, by the way? Because you keep track of a lot of the gun bills.
Well, we've got the suppressor bill that just came out of the Senate, 23-0. I don't know which senator was missing. I want to find out that information and see which senator didn't show up. I think that would be telling. But they had one senator who didn't vote, and I assume the Senate has the same rules we do, that they have to vote if they're there. So I'm assuming that one senator just was not present. And then we had that the open carry bill clarification that I was putting through that lost by 3 votes. If we had more people in the House that day, we probably would have passed that one. We've got constitutional carry coming back out. It's going into the Senate now. We passed it through the House. That's the identical sister bill to the one we passed last year that passed both the House and Senate and then was vetoed by the governor. Mm-hmm. And what we did is we retained one in the House because the Senate's bill had already come through the process and was headed to us. So we were able to retain our version of the same bill in committee and then put it back on through the committee process and onto the House floor in January, get it passed through the House and send that back over to the Senate. And it's identical to the one they just passed last year, so I'm pretty confident we're going to put another bill for constitutional carry on the governor's desk, and what she decides to do with it, we'll see. But at this point, New Hampshire stands out like a sore thumb because Vermont has had it for quite a long time, and Maine just passed it last year.
Yeah, they did. Massachusetts hasn't done anything with it yet, right?
Massachusetts won't.
Yeah, I didn't figure they would. That's a sad state.
We got another bad bill, though, when we're talking about bad bills that's coming in front of Fish and Game. I don't know how this one came out of the Senate. Outwardly, it looks like it's a fairly innocuous bill because what it's trying to do is stop people from feeding deer in their backyards. It would prohibit the act of feeding deer. And this is all stemming from the situation on the seacoast last year where they had 5 deer that died because somebody was feeding them, and they came out of that really harsh winter with the way a deer's stomach works is over the fall, its stomach changes the way that it digests food so that it can get nutrients from the nutrient poor environment that it lives in over the wintertime, eating sticks and shrubs and things like that. When a deer comes out of that harsh winter into the spring and it's given a high protein food, it can't digest it. So what happened is those deer were actually eating really rich, good for them food, but their bodies could not digest it and they died, 5 of them, all in one group. And there was a lot of outrage over it. So they put this bill forward in the Senate to prohibit people from feeding deer in their yards. Now, all the years that people have been feeding deer, it's really not been an issue. We just had that really spectacularly bad winter last year. When you read the bill, not only is it an act of prohibiting people from feeding the deer that's going to affect people who don't intentionally feed deer, such as farmers who turn their excess produce back into the soil or leave piles of pumpkins that are substandard and they can't sell in the field and they end up getting eaten by the deer and stuff. They could technically be convicted for feeding the deer for that. But there's a part of that bill, when I was reading through it, that says that any product sold here in New Hampshire that can be used to feed deer has to have a warning label prominently displayed on it that says that feeding deer can be harmful to them and cause death. That is going to make it prohibitively expensive when all these companies that make deer feed or make chicken feed, cracked corn, regular corn, and all these other things that can be fed to deer have to change their labeling to sell in New Hampshire. More likely than not, they're just going to opt not to sell their product here. And then you've got people like Blue Seal Feeds down here that's right here in New Hampshire, and they're making products for feeding wildlife that they would have to relabel. It's a bad business bill. It's going to cause a lot of damage to businesses. And then it gets more confusing when you think about the apple growers who take their substandard or drop apples and they look towards packaging those up as deer apples in the fall and selling them in bundles of five bushel bags to people who are baiting for deer during the legal baiting period. Those would now have to be all labeled. Apple growers will have to label their apples that they are harmful and could kill deer.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a messed up bill.
It is.
I'm glad you told me about that.
It's going to be coming in front of the Fish and Game Committee this Thursday and the House because it already passed the Senate. So hopefully we can kill it in committee, and if not, then we're going to have to deal with it on the House floor.
Well, couldn't you technically label anything as deer feed? I mean, a little kid could grab a lollipop in the fridge and take it out there and say, "Here, little deer." I mean, right? I mean, I know it sounds extreme, but
you know what?
That's how ridiculous the liberal agenda is.
It is ridiculous because it does not. It's not specific enough to exclude certain types of food.
They could just label anything.
And something people don't know, a lot of people don't know, is that deer are actually related very closely to rodents, not to like cows and sheep and other ruminaries.
In other words,
they're actually, if you look at their evolutionary chain and their classification in the animal kingdom, they're actually on the same category as mice, rats, squirrels, etc. Deer are basically a giant squirrel. And, they will eat anything, especially when the winter gets hard. Typically, I've got bushes in the front of my house that are holly bushes, and they've got those spiky leaves. And typically, deer won't eat those because they're not comfortable to chew because they've got spiky leaves. Even though they're an evergreen and stay green all winter, they avoid them. But they actually got to whatever they could reach this last winter because it was such a harsh winter. So when times get bad enough, they will eat anything. And so anything could be considered having to have a label saying it's harmful to deer. We're going to hurt a lot of businesses. And the Farm Bureau in New Hampshire is opposed to the bill, and they're going to be testifying against it.
Oh, that's good. Holy cow.
They only found out about it because I contacted them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. the ideas and this is coming from a rep, the ideas that some of these stinking legislators come up with to try and crush businesses and pull away our individual liberties even more than they already have been. I mean, it gets a little ridiculous after a while. Realistically, it's why you and I ran, you know?
Absolutely.
That's really all it is. Am I right? When we look at what's going on, because I hear from a lot of constituents as well, they'll say, this is just stupid. I mean, what's going on up there? And I'll tell them, I'll say, I'm just as ticked off as you are, which is why I'm fighting every stupid bill that comes forward. And frankly, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to run and make this happen and to fight these things. These same very people who are complaining can easily run.
What it comes down to, I think with 90% of the bills that we fight, is government overreach.
Yeah.
When you really start to look at it, instead of letting the free market deal with things, instead of letting education of people, I mean, Fish and Game could have handled this through an education program of how dangerous it is to feed deer in that early springtime. Nobody's disputed that in the middle of the summertime, feeding deer in your backyard is not something that's going to harm them. Their stomachs have adjusted at that point. It's early spring. But instead of approaching it through an education program, which probably would have cost less, been more effective, and far less intrusive, they decided to put a bill in with the backing of the Fish and Game Commission to try to prohibit all people from feeding deer at all times in their backyard. That's basically going to make it almost impossible for you to buy deer food to bait them during the regular baiting season that Fish and Game has set up. And talk about a mixed message.
Yeah.
Fish and Game sets a season up and says you can feed the deer to shoot them here in this period of time, but you can't feed the deer in your backyard at all ever. What kind of mixed message is that?
Yeah, that's ridiculous. So wait, I guess if I could sit here long enough and think about the reasons why the Fish and Game would back this bill, I could do it. But I'm going to go ahead and ask that question. Why would they back this bill?
Strictly as a reaction to the 5 deer that died on the seacoast.
Are you for real?
That's the reason.
So 5 deer bit the dust. No pun intended, right?
Do
they eat dust?
Yeah. We saw this happen a year ago with the chocolate and the bear baiting. Okay?
Yes, I remember that. Yep.
That was 1 or 2 bears that died from chocolate poisoning up north.
I thought it was Chris Christie.
And
Wasn't that joke where he threw bears in the back of his truck?
The problem with that bill,
yeah,
we proved through testimony that the only chocolate that's actually toxic to bears in quantity is blocks of Baker's chocolate, the raw, high cocoa content Baker's chocolate. The stray bits of chocolate on a donut that you get from Dunkin' Donuts on a glazed donut are not killing bears when they eat it.
Huh.
But the chocolate bill that was put forward to ban chocolate at bear baiting banned all amounts, even trace amounts of chocolate in there, which means that if somebody was getting their bear bait, which was very typical, I found when I was trying to research how to do it, from a donut shop with their excess unsold bagels, donuts, and whatnot, they've got to pick through it and make sure there's not a scrap of any kind of chocolate in there, because if a Fish and Game goes and finds the slightest amount of chocolate in that bear bait site, even a microgram of it, you're done. You're gone. They're going to take away your license. They're going to take and prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law. And yet that's not what's harmful to it. And we saw that knee-jerk reaction to the bears, and now we're seeing it on the deer from the 5 that died on the seacoast.
Oh, man. You're baffling my mind, really, at this point, because, I can't keep up with every bill that's going on in the House. I mean, that'd be a overtime type job if I, you know as well as I do, going through those. But holy cow!
And when you read the details, and some stuff like that is buried in there.
I know, and that's what I'm saying, because I read this therapy bill that we had discussed a little earlier. I had read it through more than several times. Some people were actually trying to school me on the bill that disagreed with me, hadn't read it once. And they're basically going off the title of the bill and assuming things. And I'm like, you've not read the bill, so stop talking and listen to me, because I'm trying to explain it to you. And they're like, blah, 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 blah. And so I'm sure they do the exact same thing with these Fish and Game bills and every other bill that's going through. And it gets so frustrating after a while. Would you agree with me that the committee oftentimes gets bills wrong with their recommendation?
It depends on how much work they're going to put into the bill. There are some bills that I've seen come through committee that have been held in that committee and discussed for months.
Yeah.
And those bills tend to come out correct. And they put amendments on them and they spend the time on them. But there's some bills that the committee just assumes we're just going to deal with it quick and get it out. And they move so quickly with it that they don't look at all the stuff. They may just listen to the few people who managed to show up that day and testify. One of the problems we get in Fish and Game is they probably get it with other committees from other departments. But when we get bills in front of Fish and Game that Fish and Game asked somebody to put in, suddenly half the committee says, well, Fish and Game wants it, let's give it to them.
Oh, wow.
And I'm sorry, I look at my job there as a check and balance against a government agency asking for and getting everything that they want. Maybe they want it, but do they need it? And that's the way we should be looking at every single one of these requests from a governmental agency. An agency may want something, but do they need it?
Yeah.
And is the trade-off worth it? And the trade-off to telling people throughout the whole state of New Hampshire that you can't feed deer ever in your yard is not worth the 5 deer because somebody fed them too early, too much of a high-protein food on the seacoast. It's education that deals with those things.
Correct. And speaking of education, we got just less than a minute left. We actually have a bill being exec tomorrow, voted on by the committee and in my committee, education, and it has to do with teaching child sexual abuse in healthy relationships. They had a commission last year for all summer, at least all summer. All they came back with was a paragraph in a bill. That's it. I said, that's all you came back with in like a half a year of a commission? You guys are moronic. I mean, this is stupid.
That's why I don't like study committees.
Yeah.
I think that in general, when you set something up for a study committee, you're either trying to get it to purposefully just go off and die somewhere,
Right.
or you're wasting taxpayer dollars to have a bunch of people sit around and yes, we only got paid our $200, but there's mileage to go meet these committee things.
Correct.
And so we're actually, anytime these study committees have to meet, people are getting paid mileage to go to the study committee and come back. And so taxpayer dollars are being spent for a study committee that may come back and say, we need another study committee.
Yep, that's exactly right. Well, thank you, folks. This was Representative Spillane from Deerfield, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I got it right. Yes. So here to educate us on all kinds of different bills that he's seeing go through various committees, like the Fish and Game and criminal justice, things like that. So guns and hunting, that's his forte or fort. In any case, thanks for watching. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, and we'll probably have another guest on. And I look forward to talking with you guys again. Please email me, call me, do whatever you want to do. Contact me, though. And I will see you guys later. God bless.